This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 575, Elegy in 6 Seconds. For Monday, January 13th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. The 6-second ad was heralded as a key vehicle for reinvigorating television advertising and reconnecting with younger audiences. Now, a couple years on, the format languishes, no longer in demand by media buyers. What went wrong? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, Facebook's latest moves on political ads, why mobile ad blocking no longer bothers us, the impact of Twitter's new reply controls, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the co-founder of strategic brand and advertising consultancy Metaforce, Mr. Alan Adamson. Alan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Bob.
Now, next up, she's fresh off her last round of chemo and ready to take on the world, direct-to-consumer consultant and founder of C-Spot Run, Ms. Wendy Cooper. Wendy, congratulations.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Now I just have to keep picking up hairs all over the house wherever I go. But
The joys of chemo. Well, I'm glad you're doing better.
Thank
Now,
you.
also joining us, we have the woman behind the red thread, a unique messaging strategy consultancy that reimagines the positioning process of your brand, founder and chief messaging strategist, Ms. Tamsin Webster. Tamsin, hi.
Hi, and I love that positioning, Bob. Well done.
Nice job.
I try. And finally, he's the knowledge leader regarding all things podcasting, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Marketing for Edison Research, Mr. Tom Webster. Tom, hi.
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much for having me yet again.
Well, how can I not with pipes like that? I mean, you got the radio voice that you absolutely have to go back for. Well, we're going to jump right into the topics. And first up, I cannot help it. I know this is like very small and petty of me, so I'm just going to say it. I told you so. Now, 6-second ads, once the darling new ad format of television, they're finally falling from favor with media buyers. Wendy, let's talk about 6-second ad. Why is the industry moving away from the format now? And is there any future for it? What's the skinny on this format going forward?
Okay, so as you know, I wasn't able to read this article. So what did it say? No, I do have an opinion about this. So I actually, from a production standpoint and from a media strategy and all of that for many years, I personally think the more diverse you are in the length of the ads that you create from concept and from your creative positioning and your branding, the better. And so since I wasn't able to read the article, I'm very sorry about that. I have to say that I think there is definitely a place for 6-second ads. Maybe 6-second ads don't have a place in general advertising. If at all. I don't know why they would. They've always been bumpers, right? And that's pretty much what they still are. They're on, in the digital space, so on YouTube and other places like that. 6-second ads are awesome because they are the unskippable bumper, lead in, lead out, whatever you want to call it. And I think 6 seconds is, it's perfect for the consumer because consumers, I believe, are engaging and watching 6-second ads longer than they are a 30 and a 15-second ad or a 60-second ad. So I'm kind of in a weird place because I didn't get to really read what the
Well,
article said, but
the article had a
from
lot of interesting nuances to the story, but basically it all comes down to, was the format overpriced? Was the format
yeah,
put into a place where it wasn't really given a chance to succeed? You know, the way you describe it as being very effective on YouTube is exactly what the 6-second ad was created for. I mean,
that's
it's
right.
just like it was based on that kind of behavior with younger people playing, playing YouTube videos, and they thought that if they could bring that 6-second format to the television world, you would have a similar type of reaction from
Well,
millennials, Gen
ex-
Zers.
there you go. So if that's what the article was talking about, I have to totally disagree with that. I don't think a 6-second ad is going to do anything. Coming from direct response television, for you know, the longer the better. Give me, the more time I have, the better. Although I always preferred, a 120 to a 60. A 30 was to drive you to retail or drive you to the web or wherever. The lengths. The strategy behind the length of the commercial was always completely different depending on the length.
And I
So
think to me, this is what was interesting about that ad, and what the behavior that didn't come, that people didn't take into account was the behavior and the habits of the creatives. Because the article was great at saying, yes, it's absolutely the best ads are envisioned as 120s or as 90s or as 60s, and they can get cut down to 30, but it's nearly impossible to take something of that length and cut it down to 6 seconds. So actually you have to envision it kind of from the ground up. And it reminds me of a great quote from Winston Churchill that says that we need to be as good at the short and sharp as we are at the tough and long. And I think that's one of this area of super short is actually a place that I see over and over again, not just in ad creatives, but in messaging in general. That's very, very difficult for people to do. And I think there were some valid points about the fact that 15-second ads were half of a 30-second ad, but the 6 seconds weren't like a third of that. So there's some issues there, but I think there's still real opportunity for folks that really think differently about 6-second ads as trailers to larger and longer things rather than cut down opportunities.
Oh,
Right,
yeah. I mean, to
right.
piggyback on what Tamsin said, where the 6-second ad I think really worked on YouTube, it was to remind you briefly of something you already knew about. Like, Geico had some success with that. Like, Geico is not an unfamiliar brand, and to see or hear a quick 6-second reminder of that has some value. But I can tell you, as someone that tests a lot of advertising and marketing in my day-to-day research, the 6-second ad is an ingredient, and the cake that it goes into is the advertising pod. And that pod on podcasting might be 1 or 2 pre-rolls. And on, Z100 in New York, it might be a 12-minute stop set. And a 6-second ad in a 12-minute stop set or a 6-minute ad break on TV will get lost. But if it's in its right position, if it's actually showcased and focused, then it can perform just as well, I think, as a 30-second. The problem is it just gets lumped in with everything else.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys, and coming from the creative side, so it's always really important to look at a 15-second, a 30-second, a 120, 28, 30 infomercial, whatever it might be, and a 6-second ad. You're right. It doesn't belong as a standalone. It belongs as an add-on, basically. And they've been using them in television for forever. They've been, they're 15 seconds or 6 seconds, but they're bumpers after this program was brought to you by. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I think it trips people up to call it an ad. It's really, as
yeah,
we said earlier, a bumper. This is brought to you by. It's like a billboard at a stadium. You can get a brand name out there, but you can't tell people anything about it meaningfully except to remind them to pay attention to it.
Is that just a lack of imagination, though? I mean, from a creative standpoint, and I'm not slamming anybody here. I'm just saying it's just like, I think creatives got caught in this. We don't have enough time to tell our story without thinking through the bigger picture of how this could be artfully applied over the course of a single program in every single commercial break, and maybe use sound effects or something that grabs attention and makes it a more impactful unit.
Yeah.
For me, that would have been a much more creative usage of this format and given the format a little bit more legs. But there's only so many tricks you can pull with this. I mean, and then the problem that the thing was like not even a third of a 30-second spot, or even it was like a third of a 15, a little less than a third and a 15 or something. And it's like, here it is, not being priced accordingly. It's being priced as a premium product. And that makes absolutely zero sense that the smaller ad unit would cost so much compared to a 30-second. It makes much better sense to buy a 15 or a 30.
Yeah. I mean, when you don't have a lot of time, I mean, you cannot present question and answer, which is what you need usually to drive actual action in the way that I think we typically think of the marketing and advertising should do. But in 6 seconds, you can ask a question or provide an answer outside of the question. In either case, what you're doing is creating curiosity, you're creating a gap, you're creating a desire to know more. And I think that that's really the opportunity. And so I don't see them just necessarily as add-ons. I think I do agree they cannot be standalones. They have to lead to something else. But I think, as is often the case with a lot of what we talk about here on the BeanCast, I think that what hasn't been taken into account is the power of habit in the normal creative process and what they create. We just don't think about, well, what would it be like, or what could we do, or what if we only did this one little piece? Like, what were different, if we can just think about different ways to bring somebody into a longer piece rather than trying to tell a part of the story, what could we do to just spark curiosity, spark a new question, just give people a hint, just something that makes them want to know more. I mean, I think that's possible in 6 seconds, but I think it's not part of the typical habit of the way that creative is produced.
I think they do that very well, or they do that on online, right? On YouTube, especially on YouTube. But on television, that's a different story. And I thought, for me, because I didn't get to read the article, I thought this was kind of focused on television media, and I think, or television broadcast network, whatever it might be, the 6 seconds has to be, you're right, created in a certain way, and then and be used not as, the expectations are just much too high to think that it's going to do the same thing as a general advertising 30 or 60-second commercial. It's just you set the expectations at a reasonable place. And but 6 seconds on television, can you imagine if everybody wanted to do a 6-second spot and there was 4,000 6-second spots on a television, commercial break?
Well, that was my point, that you have to look at it in the context of the entire stop set or pod or batch of commercials. I mean, if a movie was brought to you by 6 seconds in a quarter hour or in a half an hour of just watching the Budweiser Clydesdales, like, that's a story. You know what that is because you have a history with that brand, and they have already done the work. And so essentially they're leveraging all of the work that they have done in the past to reinforce that in just 6 seconds. And by the way, back to the movie. Thank you. That's when it works. But if you're lost in the clutter, and if you're trying to launch a new product or a new service, and you're in the middle of 8 commercials or something like that, then it just gets lost.
Alan, talk to me a little bit about the future for this format. I mean, does it have a future? And if it does have a future, what does it need to become? How does this ad unit need to evolve in order to become interesting again to media buyers?
I think it has a future because as more and more people are crowding from less and less available time, shorter is better. And I think the answer to that has already been covered. Is that when marketers figure out how to use it creatively, whether it's just the Clydesdales or just doing something more creative than trying to cram 15 seconds into 6 seconds. But find creative ways to do it and creative ways to place it. I'm skeptical about the 6-second lead into YouTube because I think most consumers spend time just watching the countdown, not paying attention to the message. But finding the right place for it, the right context, I definitely think it's not going away. The question is, it needs to find its equilibrium.
For me, that's where the biggest problem is that context issue. And kudos to Tom for bringing it up, because you put that ad into a block of other ads, whether there's a whole bunch of 6-second ads or you're just dropping it in between 15s, it's going to get lost. It needs to have some kind of premium placement, and it needs to be not be given the pricing that it's been given in the past. I mean, it seems only reasonable that you should have some kind of price discount that's commensurate with the size of the ad unit if you're going to go for a smaller ad. I mean, I know that 15s are not exactly half the price of 30s, but from what I understand in the pricing scheme of things, the 6-second ad was just egregiously priced too high. It wasn't an effective strategy. I feel like a large portion of the blame for whether or not this unit was a success on broadcast television lies with the networks. Am I wrong with that?
I don't think you're wrong with that at all. I mean, I remember in the radio industry a number of years ago when then Clear Channel, now iHeart, attempted to sell something they called less is more, where they claimed to advertisers that, we're going to play fewer commercials, but we're going to charge you a lot more for them. And they didn't actually do the work there. It didn't work, which is why we still have some fairly long stop sets on commercial radio. It is incumbent upon whoever is providing the advertising vehicle to conclusively and credibly prove that that kind of placement actually works, that economy of creative actually has as much impact.
But I think to have that impact, you have to have some level of pattern disruption, right? I do think that you can drop in a 6-second ad and a block of 15s, and just the way people's brains work, they're going to notice that something was different about that. It's not going to be different if somehow you've tried to make everything about that 6 seconds exactly like a 15, but it is going to be different if you've really thought about how that 6 seconds could operate as a pattern disruption for people who are watching. But that's another reason why it shouldn't have been priced at a premium, because it does mean that people have to actually put more creative work into these 6 seconds. So the way that advertising agencies think is that, well, we're spending more time and dollars on our end on it, so why would we spend even more to put it out there? And I think it's just, I think there's still real opportunity in these ads, but there needs to be a better adjustment and accommodation for how both sides think about the pricing of the product. In the case of ad agencies, that's how they think about the cost of coming up with creative in the first place. And for the broadcasters, it needs to be thinking about what is actually realistic for them, given how they're dividing up that time.
If I'm a broadcaster, radio, television, or whatever, and I continue to want to sell, I want to sell 6-second ads because I want to get people back to the content as much as possible without a hit to my bottom line. I mean, I could see making that 6-second spot at the top of the commercial break and having it actually sort of call out the fact that we want to get you back to the content as soon as possible. There's something special about this. And then maybe you could charge more for that. And I go back to my 6 seconds of watching the Clydesdales, right? At that point, if you can actually call out, as a result of this, we're going to get you back to the show quicker, then that's a highlight spot. Has to come at the front end, I think. And that may be worth a premium. But to just throw it into the mix, no, it's not.
It's all about placement. When you do media buying and media strategies and all of that stuff, especially for television, it's really all about intelligent placement. So when you're looking at I'm sitting here, I'm looking at my screen and I'm looking at this 15, you keep saying 15 seconds. And it's like, I remember wasn't that long ago when 15 seconds was like a bizarre amount of media time to buy for, to create a 15-second commercial. It was like, I remember discussing this probably even on the BeanCast, where 15 seconds just seemed so short. And then the 6 seconds came along. And then I remember media companies saying, yeah, we're offering 15-second spots now. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's so short. We have to, from a creative standpoint, we have to look at that and do things differently. And then, so it really boils down to correct placement, smart placement, and then not expecting the same result from a 6-second spot, let's call it that, as you would from a 15, 30, 60, 120, or whatever its expectations.
That's a really good point. It's not just about the pricing, and it's not just about the creative. It's also about the expectations for what it's trying to achieve. That needs to be adjusted as well. Really good points, guys. Well, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk next about Facebook's moves, some of them good, some of them kind of iffy in regard to political ads. It was all over the news. I couldn't avoid it. Sorry, Tom, you're going to have to talk about this again. But We're going to get to that in just a minute. First, I want to talk about our sponsor because it is not too late. If you are still setting your 2020 media strategy, I have the ability right now to connect you with what is arguably the most responsive and lucrative technology-minded audience available. That's because our sponsor, Artisanal Agency, is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv and the This Week in Tech podcasting network. Now, they have a lot of good shows. I've talked ad nauseum about some of them. I mean, just this week I was listening to iOS Today. I found this great game that I've never heard of before called Space Team. It's kind of like one of those games where you just shout at each other and everybody's got to do different things on their units while everybody's playing together. It was amazing. And I wouldn't have even heard of this game. It's so fringe. Wouldn't have even heard of it if I hadn't been listening to iOS Today. And that's just one of the many amazing shows. And I'm talking about many amazing shows, all of which are generating phenomenal results for sponsors. Now, you know the numbers. I've been saying them for a few months now. 50 million downloads a year, 70% of the audience directly working in tech, and 82% of them say that they have bought a product directly as the result of a Twit.tv ad recommendation. And remember, these are actual live read recommendations here. These aren't just ad reads, they are recommendations, and they take that responsibility very seriously. Not just anyone can advertise on Twit. Artisanal Agency is going to carefully vet each and every sponsor so that their hosts can offer your brand a genuine recommendation, while at the same time you can relax knowing there won't be any brand safety issues. Now, reach out today to start your campaign on the Twit.tv network. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more, or email hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Start your next podcast ad campaign with a show from Twit, and we thank them very much for their support of our show. Well, it's quickly becoming a tradition that when I have the Websters on, we talk about political advertising on social media. So the saga continued this past week with Facebook offering users additional controls over the political ads that they see, but essentially doubling down on continuing to run the ads and not policing the legitimacy of their messaging. Tom, they obviously took a lot of heat for this stance. I saw so many articles that just had the inflammatory headline that they're just continuing to peddle lies and all these other things. But is the criticism fair? What's your honest assessment of what Facebook did this week?
Well, as you know, Bob, and maybe some of your listeners do, my company is the sole provider of exit polling data for the major news networks during primaries, caucuses, the elections. So I'm forbidden to take partisan stances in public on these sorts of things. In terms of what Facebook has done, I think Facebook has done. They've doubled down, as you said. I think that's the right way to put it. I think they've made the wrong choice here. I think they've kind of called a bluff. Anybody can run an ad that says anything, but if you run an ad on TV that says, my product will get whites whiter, remove embarrassing stains from contour sheets, and find that slipper that's been at large under the chaise lounge, all that other kind of highfalutin advertising claims that can be easily misproven. There is a mechanism to refute those claims, have some legal relief from that and get them removed. That is not the case on Facebook. There's no FCC, there's no trade commission, there's none of that governing what they're doing. And Facebook is basically saying, so we can do what we want. And the question to me is, will there be some legislation? Will Congress come forward and say, you know what, Facebook, we're going to start to hold you accountable in the same way that we hold television and radio accountable.
Before you go on, let me clarify. Let me clarify what you're saying, because I'm not exactly understanding. So what you're saying is that there needs to be some kind of injunctive relief, some kind of legal recourse for people who are hearing an ad or seeing an ad on the network that is patently false, that they can prove it false, and there needs to be a takedown opportunity. That doesn't put Facebook responsible for policing the ads. That just says that there needs to be some kind of injunctive relief. Am I understanding you correctly?
There needs to be something, right? I mean, Facebook Facebook is basically, as you said, double down on we can't fact check everything, and that's true of a network, television network that's going to run ads on pocket fishermen. They cannot necessarily prove out that the pocket fisherman will catch you 20 bass an hour, but there is a mechanism in place. There is not such a mechanism in place to provide relief for false information on political advertising. And, at some point, either Facebook has to provide a way to police themselves, or Congress will do it for them. And what Facebook basically said was, yeah, your move, Congress, because they are going to continue, and I guarantee it, they're going to continue to peddle things that are false. That said, what really swung the last presidential election in a lot of ways was not fake news. It was well-targeted Facebook advertising. And that story, I think, has only been, I think, partially told. But there was a lot of well-targeted, legitimate Facebook advertising, which is what swung the kind of northern wall states for Trump. So fake news is less, I think, of a problem than we think it is.
Is that something that you can prove? I mean, it's just like you're the numbers guy, so you got to tell me. Is it provable that Facebook ads did that? Because there's a lot of challenge to that out in the press, especially from Facebook employees, of course, but from other people as well, talking about the fact that Cambridge Analytica, their tools were way overstated. They weren't as effective as they were touted to be in the first place, and they had no ability to have the kind of impact that was accredited to them.
Oh, I'm not talking about Cambridge Analytica, and I agree with you. I'm talking about David Parscale and some of the people in the Trump campaign itself, just placing messaging at a hyper local level. And I've given a whole talk about this. I mean, Trump's stump speech in a variety of troubled cities and towns, the messaging that was hyper targeted to those troubled cities and towns was very, very targeted to the death of manufacturing in those locations, right? To Youngstown, Ohio, to Albany, New York. And it was just messaging. It wasn't false news necessarily or fake news.
Well, how is that different?
Something that was very targeted to those markets that engaged those people. It was just advertising.
Well, how is it different from other advertising that would normally be done in a campaign? I mean, it seems to me that if you put ads on television, obviously we understand the impact of Facebook being so much more insidious in a lot of ways, but it's an effective ad tool. But it's just like, so they did that. It just means that the Democrats who were running against Trump weren't doing the same thing. They weren't being as effective with their ad strategy. It seems a simple thing.
From that perspective, Bob, you may be right. I mean, I have seen that analysis done. I'm not going to weigh on one side or the other, but I do know that completely separate from fake news, that there were elements of the Trump campaign, not Cambridge Analytica, that did a pretty good job hyper targeting just messaging to locales where the vote was in doubt. So, and that's just, as you say, that's just advertising, and that's a different thing. That's a different dog than fake news. I mean, people can make claims, and there's no shortage of false political claims and negative advertising that political action groups and PACs can make on TV and radio. That's no different. So from that perspective, it's no different at all.
Okay, Wendy, you were chomping at the bit to say something. Go for it.
Yeah, for me, there's a couple of things. So fake news has got the word news in it. So that's supposedly something very different than advertising and political advertising, because that's really not news. Then political ads typically are bought at a very hyper-targeted broadcast level. They're usually not bought at a network or national network level of advertising. So those two are very hyper targeted, which is, kind of awesome in a weird way, because that's really what it's all about from the advertiser's standpoint, right? They can go in and they can say, oh, well, this is a hurting community, so let's just blast the crap out of them as far as this message that we want them to see, which is coming from the political side of things. But where Facebook is concerned, Facebook is basically, I think, saying the same. Oh, and then the other thing that one cannot do on television with political ads is share them. You know, things get out of hand, and ads are shared, I think, and comments are made, and all of this stuff starts to go on, and the emotions start to take place, where, you know, that doesn't really happen with television and political stuff and ads and things like that for advertising. So Facebook is in kind of this position where they're basically saying, well, if they don't have to, because political ads are not subject to the same regulations as if I'm going to sell a pocket fisherman.
So
And
let me just jump in here, because there's one thing about the Facebook move that I give them credit for, and this is something that Tom, you brought up the last time you were on the show, so you don't have to comment on this again if you don't want to. But essentially, when we were talking about Twitter banning all political ads, you at that time were saying that that was abdicating some kind of responsibility. That's at some point advertising needs to be able to, in other words, people with money would still be able to advertise on issues, while the political groups that would be against the people with money would not be able to advertise because they would be considered a political ad going against a company. I think that's a legitimate point. And I think that Facebook, in awareness of that, is allowing political ads to go on their platform. What we're really concerned about, if I can just crystallize it, is the ability for Facebook to somehow get away with putting an ad out there and not have any kind of responsibility for the content that's being portrayed on their platform. And I think that's never going to happen without any kind of some kind of legal remedy. I mean, it's just like, they're right. They have no legal reason to do anything more on the platform until Congress tells them you need to do something more on your platform.
And they even say that. They say, well, lacking regulation, we're not going to do anything. So, I mean, it's hard, because at some level, like, I feel like Facebook is like a giant toddler that was like, well, I didn't mean to create this giant media platform, so I don't have to treat it as if I did. But no, I mean, you still have to deal with the impact of whatever it is that you created, whether or not that was your intent. At the same time, I think, yeah, there's also a lot of pearl clutching and just absolute like head in the sanding happening in Congress, saying, well, we don't quite know what it is either, so we're not going to do anything. Where in fact, there actually is precedent set for how to deal with political ads. And the thing is, I think even if Facebook willingly took on themselves the rules that have been placed on advertising on radio and television. In other words, where somebody has to say, I'm, Tom Steyer and I approve this message, or I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message, or that they have, those ads have to be clear who paid for them, who's responsible for them, who's owning the content. It seems to me that would be a brilliant solution for Facebook, because Facebook gets to sit back and go, it's not us. And they can say, hey, the people who need to own the content are owning the content. But to be able to completely hands off and say we're going to put no restrictions on it, I think is lazy and irresponsible.
And it's going to get them. I don't think sooner either Congress is it's eventually going to do something, or ethically, the level of outrage are going to get more and more people to start dropping off. I like any of the other issue, it's incredibly complex, but I think what you just said, Wendy, is a crux of it. Because there is a lack of clarity between what's advertising and what's your friend's content on Facebook, consumers, grew up in a world where if it was published on television or in a magazine, it probably was true. So no, that's not true anymore. And their ability to discriminate between a headline on the National Enquirer and a headline in the New York Times in a Facebook environment is really hard, because it's all mushed together. So you don't know whose message it is. There's no way to prove it's accurate or not. If it's inaccurate, as we started the conversation, there's no way to seek any remedy. And with technology changing, and you can create, if you would, fake news that's more real than real news, it's only going to get messier, and you just don't know how many other hands are at the controls to drive up the volume. It is a phenomenal tool that's out of control, and
But what
like
about
everything
what
else,
about the new controls?
sometimes the best things need to be moderated. It's
Well, Alan,
out of control is not a good thing for many categories.
Well, Alan, they launched a whole bunch of controls for political ads for consumers to choose, I assume, which political ads they want to see, or whether or not they want to see any political ads. And I mean,
most people don't. I mean, but I can't imagine many people playing with those tools. They just double click on their phone when they're bored and they scan, and the more outrageous the claim, the more interested they are. There's a reason the National Enquirer, did really well at supermarket checkout for all those years, because you would read that outrageous headline and you couldn't resist picking it up. And I think the same phenomenon happens on Facebook. To find your cat, stubbed its toe, no one looking at. To find, something outrageous about a political candidate, you're going to share that 1,000 times. Can you believe this?
Now, does everybody agree with that? I mean, it's just like they kind of made a big deal about their new controls that allow some kind of protection from political advertising. But when I looked at it, I kind of felt a little bit like what Alan was talking about. I felt like this was not going to have any impact because people don't play with their privacy controls. Why would they play with their ad controls for?
It's another example of that kind of like toddler mindset of like, well, I said you were responsible for it, so if you didn't do it, then it's not my fault. Like, it's like, and yet they're the ones that are hosting the content, which is what's driving me nuts.
Ultimately, you need smarter friends.
Well, yes, clearly. I mean, I think Wendy had a great point in the sense of kind of anticipating what's coming down the pike. I think a general rule of thumb is that if there is not regulation, then regulate yourself in the way that you would most like to be regulated and make the regulation job easy, which to me makes it like, why wouldn't Facebook say, you know what, actually, let's do this. Let's require what TV and what radio requires on political advertising, even though we're not being asked to do it. So because that's actually the most reasonable compromise that we can come up with. By doing nothing to to the other points that have been raised, Alan's point, they're opening themselves up to way worse regulation than what they would probably choose themselves. And the cycle of outrage that is currently keeping them afloat, but is also driving a lot of people off of the platform.
I'm going to give you $1 million, $1 billion business idea, Bob.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
All right, and that is that there should be a central private body. Let's call them underwriters laboratories. And if you have a political ad and you choose to, you can submit it to underwriters laboratories, and they will give it a UL certification. They don't certify turkey fryers. They won't certify ads that are misleading, but they will certify ones that are factually correct. And you don't have to do this, but if your ad has that certification, then maybe more people will pay attention to it.
Or
and
better
not fry
yet,
their turkeys.
put a hook, promote a standard where you promote a standard out there where only the ads with the whatever that label is, will actually show up on a page. It's just like that way. If a user is choosing to only see ads that are labeled, they could see it. Yeah, that'd be a fairly good idea. Of course, nobody would do it.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Bob, Tom, and everyone on the call and everyone listening. So, Tom, what you just said was super genius, but. That is exactly what should be done. And here's a little tidbit that most people don't know. Most people do not know this about the direct response television industry that obviously came around because of deregulation in the 80s. But what happened was everything got so out of control, and that reputation of the yell and sell, and we're going to say whatever we want, and we're going to make all these promises, blah blah blah, created a real big stir back in the early 90s. And the infomercial industry, ERA was the Electronic Retailing Association, now defunct because they didn't progress with the times, but we were self-regulated. We did work with the FTC to stay self-regulated, and we had very strict rules about what you could and you could not say, the disclaimers you had to have in every infomercial, every short form, whatever it might be in direct response. So we did do that, and we did have a symbol because there were so many. It was a wild west, right? It was just consumers were getting screwed and vendors were getting screwed, product people, brands, everybody was screwing everybody else, and the media companies were making tons of money and blah 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 blah. So it became very self-regulated, working directly with the FTC, and we did do that. And so that's really kind of what needs to be done in this world. You're right.
And we already have something like that. We have the ad choices. The ad choices system should be put into effect when you're talking about political ads too. Why not? I mean, it's just like there'd be absolutely no reason not to put that kind of thing into place and make it some kind of standard. But oh, well, we can talk forever about the politics, but we got to move on and talk about ad blocking, another crisis that we have to go cover. When ad blocking was introduced on mobile devices, the ad world cried Armageddon. Now, a few years later, it's more a nuisance than a real concern. So, Alan, mobile advertising, and I'm talking about mobile banner advertising, the programmatic stuff, has never been the center of digital ad strategy. Even though mobile's very important, mobile ads have never made the backbone of it. So is the lack of concern more about economics, or truly that mobile ad blocking is just not catching on at the rate that we thought it was? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, when it first started, everyone was saying, "Oh my God, it's the end of the world," especially for lots and lots of content producers that completely rely on the ad revenue, and they were worried about, gee, if we lose that piece, then we're nowhere. But the reality, as you indicated, is that when people are on mobile, and they're on mobile more and more, they're not, spending the majority of their time in a browser searching randomly to benefit from the easy ad blockers. Most of the time, they're on apps. And if you're in an app world, 60 or so % of the time, you're very targeted, and you're not. Blockers have no relevance. Then, secondarily, blockers on a desktop when you're in a browser are reasonably easy to use, but have downsides. And many consumers quickly found out that a lot of their content they were used to using was being zapped by their ad blocker, and they disable them. But they're harder to install on a phone. So the combination of lots of time on your phone is spent in an app, and the complexity and downside of using it, I think, has stabilized it as a chunk of the market. So it's not an inconsequential chunk. It's about 25% of users use it. But I think advertisers have come to grips and say, well, maybe those 25% are not people that are mission critical to us anyway.
I question the 25% number even. I mean, I think that 25% of the audience has maybe downloaded or has an ad blocker on their phone, but I mean, I'm not going to believe that everybody has it activated and is zapping all the ads. It just doesn't make sense. And as you say, most people are in apps. We're not going to our web browser except when we have to maybe do a Google search, when we're on our phones. Most of the time, if we're really engaged with a brand, we're doing it on an app in some way. And that's a much better way to go about it. One of the most interesting things about this article for me was what you said, Alan, that when we're talking about the ad blockers, they're just way too complicated to install on a mobile device. And I think that for me, that's the biggest point in this story, that, we were so scared about them, but they're so difficult to put in play when we're talking about a mobile device that it's really never going to grow. I can't see any scenario where it would grow unless perchance Apple opens up their ecosystem, or Android opens up their ecosystem and allows you to zap ads in the applications. Then you got real trouble. Otherwise, there's no way that this is going to happen. Would anybody disagree with me?
I won't. I think consumers are looking to simplify their life on mobile devices and are reluctant to add any more complexity to just basically loading up the apps and using them. And unless Apple or Android does it at the system level to build it in and makes it something you have to turn off, then I think it's reached its plateau.
I think there's also something built in behaviorally to the difference between mobile and online, because I'm definitely one of those people that have an ad blocker turned on my web browser on my laptop, and I don't have an ad blocker on my phone. And part of that is because at the very behavior of purchasing apps in the first place, and the operative word there is purchase, a lot of times you get the option of whether or not you're taking the free version, which has the ads, or the paid version, which doesn't. And I think you kind of make that deal at the time you decide which version of the app that you're going to download, whether or not you're going to deal with the ads or not. And if it gets to be a point with certain apps where it's too frustrating for you, I know this has been the case for me. I'm like, well, to heck with it. I'm just going to go get the paid version of it because, $4 is worth my not having to deal with the ad. So, I mean, I think functionally and behaviorally, that's a big difference, and it's not something to ignore. But I think it's also why you're right. I think the kind of, back to pearl clutching, that it's just not as big of a deal there because it's not a big part of the budget. B, I think people are more used to seeing those ads on mobile, and C, they're not even paying attention to them anyway, because a lot of people have made the decisions to buy the versions of the apps that don't have them, or to go with the free version so that they've kind of already decided to ignore them.
I think, Alan, you're right to question that 25% as well. I mean, it's one thing to say that, 25% of a sample of internet users say that they have an ad blocker or have blocked ads. And it's very easy for the enumerate to conflate that with 25% of all ads are blocked. And I don't believe that's true. And
it has to be turned on.
To
you could have downloaded it, but it stays in your download file.
100%. And in addition to everything that Tamsin just said, there are also, just anecdotally from me, multiple sites where I have turned the ad blocker off because it has destroyed the functionality of a site that I really actually wanted to use. And, kudos to them for outsmarting me. But having an ad blocker and 100% using it are two different things.
Well, let's move on and talk about our next and last story. We have news that Twitter will now allow users to block specific users, people watching their feed, from replying to the tweets that they put out. Tamsin, what are your thoughts on this move, and will it provide a safer environment for users who have experienced any kind of harassment online from potential trolls who are out there?
Yes, I think that's pretty straightforward. Though, my experience with folks that have dealt with online trolls is that the very persistent will continue to find ways to, open new accounts and whatever, and stay with it.
Right.
However, it's nice to be able to just say from the get-go, just an ability to block somebody from replying, or, as from what I understood, being able to say, I'm just putting this particular post out there with no comments turned on, essentially. I think that so there's no argument. I'm in full support of that, and full support of someone being able to decide whether or not they want feedback from a particular thing that they post, particularly if the motivation for that is coming from safety and personal sanity and all of that. I think just generally, and this probably has a huge amount to do with the person that I'm married to, I'm always concerned about closing yourself off. Again, I'm not talking about trolls here. Closing yourself off from views and opinions and perspectives that are different from your own. And I mourn as a human and as a citizen and as a fellow citizen of the human race, our degradation of civil discourse. And I think that the less that we are, again, trolling aside, I am absolutely not talking about that. But the more that we just say, well, I don't like what you think, I don't agree with your position, so I don't want to talk to you, actually puts all of us at a negative position. So I think that the functionality is important, that we have it. And I would exercise caution in all of us with how we choose to use it, and that we're using it in terms of making sure that we are protecting where we need to protect, but that we're also not closing ourselves off from opportunities to learn. And that to me is a critically important thing, just to do what we can to start to try to rebuild bridges that have just been absolutely broken and burned over the past few years.
Well, let's talk about it from a macro level here for a second, because this is obviously being put in place because of a lot of trolling and a lot of high-profile people leaving the platform as a result of that. and bringing a lot of their audience with them. So Twitter is in desperate need of trying to put something in place that makes the platform seem more safe for the average user so that the advertisers will feel comfortable coming back and the advertisers will advertise with them. What do you think, Alan? Is this enough? Are they doing enough to make it so that advertisers will feel comfortable again and feel like, yes, we're going to spend a lot of money on this platform and that users are going to come back in droves as a result of this one change?
I think it's 50-50, just because I think it's one point is that most, will people will they opt to this, or will they again not, they have that option, but most people won't choose to do it or won't care about it until they get into the type of backlash and then they just bail on the platform. Or they can just say that you have this option to make people feel better, but if it doesn't change that behavior, so I don't think that, I think they had to do it to provide some response. Whether it will really change the volatility of the medium and make it more acceptable to people, I think not. I think it's going to ultimately sort out where it's going to sort out, and people on the platform will put up with it, and people who don't like that will bail out on the platform.
And Tom, I want you to weigh in here for. Oh, were you going to say something, Wendy?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I could care less about Twitter. Am I the only person that feels that way? Is it?
No, you're
no,
not.
you're not.
Twitter is my first social network, and it's basically my last one now. It's I'm with you. I find it to be an absolute cesspool, which tells me I need to curate my feed a little bit better. But I spend no time there.
Well, and that's
I.
what I want Tom to weigh in on is that, yes, it's a cesspool. Yes, it's got a lot of problems with trolls. And yes, it's not a safe environment for advertisers to exist. But
Sounds
kind
like
of
the worst fairy tale ever.
But
Cesspools and trolls. Oh my!
But think about it. Think about it. What is the appeal to the people who are there? It's the controversy. It's the cesspool. It's the flame wars. That people love it for that exact reason. For those types of usages, it's fantastic. And those are consumers. They are people who we can advertise to. Is it so bad that, I mean, obviously Twitter is obviously a destructive place in a lot of cases, but does putting this in place actually take away some of the magical charm of the core users and might actually end up with people leaving the platform?
I think a couple of things about this, and first of all, I want to double down on what Tamsin said about the macro level of this being potentially destructive by just being another place to create filter bubbles, which that's true, right? We also have the right for an entertainment medium to shape it the way that we want. And I'll say two things about this. Number one, I think part of this may have also been to lure people back, not who are just consumers of it, but producers of content. And I quote here a very, very recent interview that I heard with the great American philosopher, Charles Barkley. And Charles is not on Twitter, and he has been very defiant about this. He is not on any kind of social media. And he's basically said, I don't need the haters. But if he could, but he's a very outspoken person, right? He's a very outspoken person who is very comfortable saying controversial things. He doesn't want to deal with all the hate on Twitter. And what I think Twitter has done here they've kind of one-upped Facebook. They've mimicked their categories here with one addition, and that is the statement category. And I actually think that's kind of brilliant. And if you're someone like the great American philosopher Charles Barkley, and you can log in on Twitter every once in a while and tweet something that is a statement and be sort of immune or not see all of the hatred that would come from it, maybe you'll come back. Maybe you'll do that. And that's good for Twitter, because that's going to get opinions like his out there, which are vital opinions. And I'm using him as an example. I think things like the statement, it's not like you can't tweet something in response to it, right? If you're following Charles Barkley and he tweets something outlandish, you're free to tweet whatever you want. It's just not something you're going to reply to him on. And I think that's fine. I think if anything, it's going to add to the robustness and the richness of the debate. So I actually think it's a good move.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Alan Adamson. You can find him at metaforce.co. That's metaforce.co. Tell us what's going on in your world, Alan. What would you like to promote?
Well, I'm enjoying the concept of using what we call special forces, finding great people to solve tough problems and then terrific people to activate it. So that's what Metaforce is about. And with the right talent, solving tough problems is enjoyable. I'm also still an adjunct at NYU and working with entrepreneurial students. And it amazes me every day how many kids are in business school not wanting to join Goldman Sachs, but wanting to do a startup.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. And obviously, I'm an adjunct at NYU as well. So it's just like, I understand. We have great students there. Now, next up, Wendy Cooper. You can find her at wendycooper.com. You can also find her at C Spot Run. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote, Wendy? Okay, we'll come back.
There we go. There we
there
go.
you go.
I'm back.
Okay.
I'm back. Okay. First, thanks for having me today. It was great to finally be on the BeanCast with the famous Websters. So that's awesome. I'd like to promote C Spot Run Productions. So you said it, it's the letter C, C Spot Run Productions, concept to consumer. I've just been working in that space since 1997. I am super excited to be moving now into a healthy 2020. I did have a terrible 2019, but I have a real positive focus, and I am focusing on doing more creative and getting more into the voice first world of things. I'm learning about all of that so that I can bring my services from C Spot Run into that voice first world, which I adore. And my podcast is The Wendy Cooper Show, Speaking of Age, which is conversations with remarkable people over 50. So, and you can find that wherever you download your podcasts. So
That's great and very succinct. I love it. Now, next up, we have Tamsin Webster. You can find her at tamsinwebster.com. That's the home of The Red Thread. And I'm going to let Tamsin tell you all about it. Tamsin, what would you like to promote?
Sure. No, well, the Red Thread is all about making sure your idea is strong enough to build on. So if anyone's curious about that and their message, then a quick free assessment they can take that they can do at tamsinwebster.com/assessment, which helps them see where, just how big their big idea is and where to improve it to do the things they want it to do.
I might have to take that test. I want to see what it's like. And last but not least, Tom Webster. You can find him at edisonresearch.com. That's where he is stirring up trouble all the time with all his number stuff. Tell us what's going on in your world, Tom. What would you like to promote?
I've got a new podcast, not just me, but my wife and I.
The famous Websters.
No, I am delighted.
it's the perfect name.
It is the famous Websters, yeah, or of a pasta or something like that. No, Tamsin and we're 7 episodes deep now into a show that we call the Freenoter. We know lots of friends who are professional speakers who get paid to speak, who are keynoters, and then there's people like me who toil in the trenches, 50 gigs a year, kind of spreading the gospel about what we do for free. And there aren't a lot of resources for people who speak to build their business to do it well. So Tamsin and I have collaborated on the Freenoter, and that's available at thefreenoter.com and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I love what you're doing with that show. So definitely, if anybody's out there and wants to take on another podcast in addition to this one, well, then go ahead and go to that site. It's a fantastic show.
It comes with cocktails.
It does come with cocktails.
And for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Wendy, these experiential activations are so wonderful sometimes, and sometimes they're just plain old weird, but I love this one from what Westworld did at CES, and this is the fair for this week. They basically hosted a dinner event that was uncomfortable to say the least. They focused a dinner event with around a fake company called Insight. And during the dinner, with just a little bit of data ahead of time, they knew everything about everybody there at every single dinner. And they were just providing this invasive data to create what was probably one of the most memorable experiential experiences I've seen to date. Definitely got people talking about Westworld, didn't it?
Well, it got people talking about Westworld, but it also got them totally creeped out, I'm sure.
Oh, exactly. But the creep out factor is what made it so
creepy,
compelling. No, it made it so compelling to talk about. It's just like it keys in totally with the plot line of what's going on with the Westworld story. It brought it all to life in such an interesting and very uncomfortable way. I thought that was just great.
Yeah, it was great. It's a definite super thing to do.
Now, on the bad side of things, we have a fail. I looked up the pronunciation of this, and now I completely forget how to say it. But Jean Casino, is that it? Jean Casino? Anybody?
Tom Webster, resident French expert.
Je m'appelle Tom Webster. Ouais.
A French retailer named something Casino accidentally advertised flat screen TVs for about 30 euros instead of the actual sale price, which was 399 euros. Obviously, this caused a huge stir, Tom, my French expert, so I'm going to you. It caused a huge stir. They had people camping out within the store, yelling and screaming and trying to take advantage of a French law that says if you advertise a price, you have to honor the price. And they insisted that they wanted their 30 euro TVs as soon as humanly possible. This was just a plain stupid advertising mistake. I love it. It's classic in every single way.
Yeah, it was very French. And on the one hand, they certainly brought notoriety to their company. But as they say in France, j'ai d'autres chats à fouetter, which means I have other cats to whip, Bob Norp.
And last but not least, the foul of the week goes to Teen Vogue, noted now as a premier source for news for young people and an outlet that has been very critical of Facebook in the past. It suddenly came out with this glowing piece about the women affecting change at Facebook, which inspired a lot of questions online, which then inspired them to reissue the piece as a sponsored content piece. Then they got even more backlash, Tamsin, when faced with an outcry. Then they pulled the piece, and meanwhile, Facebook insists that they never paid for a thing. What the heck was going on at Teen Vogue this week?
Oh my! I wish I knew. The thing is that it's such an opportunity, really, for Teen Vogue that has actually built quite a reputation over the past year and a half for really insightful, incisive, investigative articles. Do one on themselves to really explain what happened here. Because I never in my life thought I would say this, but like Teen Vogue right now has way more credibility than Facebook. So when Facebook says we didn't do anything, and Teen Vogue is like sponsor content, never mind, we're pulling it. Something really untoward had to have happened there. And I'm really waiting for Teen Vogue to really pull the curtain back on themselves and explain exactly what happened. If they do that, then they will be consistent with the brand and the message they've put out about themselves. If they don't, then that starts to really erode kind of retroactively what they've already put out there in the marketplace. So my fingers are crossed that Teen Vogue will actually tell us what happened.
I hope so, because they've got to come clean. They've got to let people know what happened, because there's way too many questions going on. Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.